She was a homeless widow who bought a $5 tool shed. What she discovered hidden beneath the workbench would not only make her rich, but it would also unravel a truth that would redefine everything she thought she knew about love, loss, and the real meaning of home. And if you've ever felt like you've lost it all, maybe stick around. Sometimes the smallest key opens the biggest door. Go ahead and subscribe if you believe in second chances, because this community is built for people who do. The air in the county services building had a specific, defeated smell. It was a mix of stale coffee, wet wool, and the faint, metallic tang of institutional cleaning supplies that never quite managed to scrub away the lingering scent of desperation. I had been breathing that air for 2 hours, sitting on a plastic chair that was molded into a shape that defied human anatomy. My own personal scent was probably adding to the bouquet. 3 days without a proper shower. A life condensed into a single backpack pressing against the rigid plastic. Mr. Henderson sat opposite me, his desk a small island of organized calm in the quiet chaos of the room. He was a good man, with kind eyes that had seen too much, and a tie that was always just slightly askew, as if it, too, was tired of trying to stay straight. He slid a single, flimsy piece of paper across the desk. It had a grainy, black-and-white photograph of a small wooden structure stapled to the corner. A shed. "It's not much, Alara," he said, his voice low and even. He had a way of speaking that was meant to be soothing, but it always felt like he was delivering bad news about a sick pet. "I know that. It's a donation from the Miller estate. They're liquidating some rural parcels, and this one was too small to be of interest to developers. The shed is old. It's on a 1/4 acre out past Oakhaven." He paused, letting the information settle like dust. "The program can acquire the deed for you. The administrative fee is $5. He said it so matter-of-factly. $5. The last $5 I had in the world were folded into a tiny, desperate square in my pocket, tucked beside a crumpled photo of Liam and me on our wedding day. We were smiling, impossibly young, with no idea that our forever had an expiration date of only 2 years. His sudden death from an aneurysm had been the first domino. The medical bills we didn't know his insurance wouldn't cover were the second. The discovery of the secret loans he'd taken out was the third. The foreclosure notice was the final, crashing blow. Now, my entire future was being discussed in terms of a tool shed. A garden shed. A place for lawnmowers and rusty shovels. "A shed," I repeated. The word felt foreign and absurd in my mouth. It wasn't a home. It wasn't even a room. It was a box, a wooden box, on a patch of dirt 20 miles from anything resembling a job or a bus line that ran more than twice a day. "What am I supposed to do with a shed, Mr. Henderson?" My voice was flat. I had run out of tears a week ago, somewhere in the back of my repossessed Honda Civic, clutching a steering wheel that was no longer mine. Now I just felt hollowed out, a walking shell. He didn't flinch. He just nodded, his gaze steady. "Survive, Alara. That's the first step. It has a roof. It has a door that locks. It's yours. No one can kick you out. It's not the shelter. You know the waiting list for a private room there." I did know. 6 months, at least. Until then, it was a cot in a gymnasium with 50 other women, each of us guarding our meager belongings while we slept, the air thick with coughing and quiet sobbing. The shed was an insult. A profound, systemic, bureaucratic insult. But it was also a choice. It was the first choice I'd had in months that wasn't between bad and worse, but between worse and something else. Something unknown. I look at the grainy photo. The shed stood alone in a field of tall grass, looking small and defiant under a vast, empty sky. It looked like me, alone, weathered, and not much, but still standing. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the worn edges of Liam's smiling face. I pulled out the $5 bill. It was soft as cloth from being folded and unfolded so many times. I smoothed it on the desk. "Okay," I said, the word a puff of air. "Okay. I'll take the shed." Mr. Henderson's shoulders relaxed a fraction of an inch. He took the bill and slid the paper, the deed, back to me. It felt impossibly heavy in my hand. He gave me a thin, silver key. It was old, the kind with a circular top and a simple, blocky tooth. The key to my new kingdom, a kingdom of splinters and dirt. The shame of homelessness is a quiet, corrosive thing. It's not just the lack of a place to sleep. It's the loss of identity. You are no longer a person who lives somewhere. You are a person who doesn't. You become invisible. People look through you, around you, past you. You learn to fold yourself into smaller and smaller spaces, to take up less room, to make no noise. For 2 months after the foreclosure, I had my car. It was a tiny, mobile world. I had a routine. I'd park in a 24-hour grocery store lot until the manager got wise, then a quiet industrial park, then a residential street where I hoped no one would notice the condensation on the inside of the windows in the morning. I'd use gas station bathrooms to wash my face and brush my teeth. My reflection in the cracked mirror, a stranger I no longer recognized. My hair was always greasy, my clothes perpetually wrinkled. I ate cold canned soup and saltine crackers. Every day was a masterclass in logistics. Where to find free Wi-Fi to apply for jobs I'd never get with no address. Where to charge my phone. How to look presentable enough to not be immediately dismissed as what I was. Liam was a ghost who rode shotgun. I'd talk to him, raging at him for the secrets, for the debt, for leaving me in this mess. Then I'd sob, apologizing, remembering the way he'd hum off-key while making coffee, the feel of his hand in mine. The grief was a physical weight, a second passenger in the cramped car. Then, one morning, there was a knock on the window. Not the gentle tap of a concerned citizen, but the hard, authoritative rap of a tow truck driver holding a repossession order. The bank that held the loan on the car, a loan I was 3 months behind on, had found me. I stood on the curb, my backpack clutched to my chest, and watched my last private space in the world get hitched up and driven away. That's how I ended up in Mr. Henderson's office, the end of a very short, very steep road. The shed was, by any rational measure, a terrible idea. It was an admission of defeat. It was accepting a life on the absolute fringes, a half step up from living in a tent. But the alternative, the shelter, felt like a different kind of death. It was the institutionalization of my failure. It was becoming a number, a case file, a cot in a row. The thought of it sent a cold spike of panic through my chest. The shelter was a system designed to manage people like me, not to help us. It was a holding pen. The shed, as pathetic as it was outside that system. It was mine. The word echoed in my mind, mine. I hadn't owned anything since the bank had seized the house, the car, the life Liam and I had built. The deed Mr. Henderson had given me was simple, almost comically so. It stated that for the sum of $5, the parcel of land designated 1138-B, Oak Haven County, was transferred to Ilara Vance. No mortgage, no landlord, no rules, just a key and a plot of dirt. I spent the rest of the day at the public library, staring at the deed. I used their computer to look up the address on a satellite map. It was just as he'd said, a tiny green square surrounded by larger, browner squares of farmland, miles from the small town of Oak Haven. A green dot showed the bus stop, a lonely speck on a county road. I traced the route with my finger. It was a journey into nothingness. But it was a journey, and for the first time in a long time, it was a journey forward, not just a frantic scramble to stay in one place. That night, I stayed at a temporary emergency shelter, a church basement that offered mats on the floor for one night only. Lying there in the dark, listening to the symphony of snores and troubled sighs, I clutched the key in my hand. Its sharp edges dug into my palm, a small, hard point of reality in the overwhelming fog of my life. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was just something to hold on to. The next morning, I used the last of my change to buy a bus ticket to Oakhaven. The bus groaned its way out of the city, leaving the concrete and steel behind for the rolling, frost-bitten hills of the countryside. The windows were grimy, streaked with dirt, framing the passing landscape like a poorly shot film. The world outside was brown and gray, the skeletal fingers of dormant trees clawing at a sky the color of dishwater. It was late autumn, a season of decay, and my mood was a perfect match for the scenery. I sat with my backpack on my lap, my forehead pressed against the cool, vibrating glass. Every mile the bus traveled felt like a mile further away from the person I used to be. Alara Vance, wife. Alara Vance, homeowner. Alara Vance, graphic designer with a small but growing freelance business. That person was gone, buried under a mountain of debt and loss. I was just Alara. A name attached to a backpack and a key to a shed. The other passengers were few and far between. A tired-looking woman with a baby, a young man in a worn-out work jacket listening to music too loud on his headphones, an elderly farmer who smelled of soil and chewing tobacco. None of them looked at me. I was invisible again, and for once, I was grateful for it. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't want to have to explain the unexplainable. After an hour that felt like a lifetime, the bus driver called out, "Oakhaven Junction, County Road 12. His voice was gravelly, impatient. I was the only one to move. I grabbed my backpack and shuffled to the front of the bus. As the doors hissed open, a blast of cold, damp air hit me. It smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves. The driver gave me a curious look as I stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. "This is it. Next bus back to the city ain't till tomorrow morning," he grunted, as if offering me one last chance to reconsider. I just nodded, and the doors hissed shut, cutting me off. The bus pulled away with a roar and a cloud of diesel smoke, leaving me in a profound and unnerving silence. I was utterly alone. The junction was just a faded stop sign and a patch of worn grass. Across the road, a dirt track, barely more than 2 tire ruts, snaked away into a field of tall, withered weeds. A rusty, leaning signpost read, "Miller Lane." This had to be it. I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs, and started walking. The dirt track was muddy in places, and my worn-out sneakers were quickly soaked. The silence was broken only by the cawing of a distant crow and the rustle of the wind through the dead grass. It felt like I was walking off the edge of the world. After about a quarter of a mile, I saw it. Just like the photo, but smaller, sadder. The shed stood in the middle of its quarter-acre kingdom, the unpainted wood weathered to a silvery gray. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, and one of the 2 windows was cracked. It was surrounded by a sea of waist-high weeds and thorny bushes. It was the most pathetic, forlorn little building I had ever seen. And it was all mine. My heart, which I thought had run out of feelings, managed to produce a fresh wave of despair. This was a mistake, a huge $5 mistake. I wanted to turn around, to run back to the road and wait for a car, any car, to take me back to the familiar misery of the city. But where would I go? Back to Mr. Henderson's office? Back to the library? There was no back anymore. There was only this shed, this field, this key in my pocket. I walked up to the door, my feet catching on unseen roots and vines. A heavy, rusted padlock held it shut. It looked ancient. I fumbled in my pocket for the key. It felt small and inadequate against the bulk of the lock. My hands were trembling from the cold and the nerves. I pushed the key into the lock. It resisted, gritty with rust. For a horrible second, I thought it was the wrong key, that this whole thing was some cruel joke. I jiggled it, pushed harder, and with a painful, grating screech, the lock turned. The shackle sprang open. I pulled the lock off. It was heavy in my hand. I took another deep breath, placed my hand on the rough wooden door, and pulled. It opened with a low groan, the sound of something that hadn't been disturbed in a very long time. The air that rolled out of the shed was thick and heavy, a time capsule of smells. It smelled of dry rot, engine oil, spider webs, and the earthy scent of mice. It was the smell of abandonment. For a moment, I just stood on the threshold, peering into the gloom. The inside was dark, the only light coming from the single, grimy window and the open doorway. As my eyes adjusted, shapes began to emerge from the shadows. Along one wall, a row of old garden tools, a rake, a spade, a hoe, stood like silent, skeletal sentinels, their wooden handles gray and smooth with age, their metal heads coated in a layer of orange rust. Shelves on the opposite wall were cluttered with glass jars full of screws and nails, all sorted by size, their metal lids now a uniform shade of brown. There were half-empty cans of paint, a tangled mess of electrical cords, and a small, rusted, hand-cranked drill. It was a time capsule of someone else's projects, someone else's life. And in the center of the back wall, under the one cracked window, was the workbench. It was the heart of the shed. It was made of thick, heavy planks of wood, its surface scarred and stained with 100 different colors of paint, oil, and something dark that looked like old blood. A heavy steel vise was bolted to one corner, its jaws locked tight. A few simple tools were laid out on its surface, as if their owner had just stepped away for a moment. A hammer, a screwdriver, a wrench. They were coated in the same fine layer of dust as everything else. My first feeling was one of overwhelming intrusion. This was someone's space, someone's sanctuary, and I was an invader. But then a second feeling pushed through, a flicker of purpose. This was my space now. If I was going to live here, I couldn't live in someone else's ghost. I had to make it mine. The task was monumental. I set my backpack down in the one clear corner. The first priority was light and air. I went to the uncracked window and scraped away years of caked-on dirt and cobwebs with my fingernails. A little more gray light filtered in. I pushed at the window frame, and to my surprise, it swung open on creaky hinges, letting in a gust of fresh, cold air that began to chase away the mustiness. That small victory felt huge. I spent the next hour just clearing a space. I took the old tools and leaned them neatly against the outside wall. I gathered the empty paint cans and the tangled cords into a pile. The floor was packed earth, cold and damp, covered in a layer of dust and mouse droppings. I found a tattered old broom in the corner and began to sweep, the bristles so worn down it was almost useless. But it wasn't action. It was work. And work was better than thinking. The dust swirled in the shafts of weak sunlight, dancing like tiny ghosts. As I swept, I began to feel a strange connection to the place. I wasn't just cleaning a shed. I was performing an excavation, uncovering a history. Finally, I got to the workbench. It was too heavy to move, a solid, immovable anchor in the room. I decided to clean under it. I got down on my hands and knees, the cold of the dirt floor seeping through my jeans. It was dark under there, a space filled with cobwebs and shadows. I swept out brittle, dead leaves and the husks of ancient insects. As my hand moved across the packed earth, my fingers brushed against something that wasn't dirt. It was wood, smooth and flat. Curious, I swept away more of the dust. There, flush with the dirt floor, was the edge of a wooden board. It wasn't a random piece of scrap. It was perfectly cut, a neat rectangle about 2 feet long and a foot wide. It had a small, carved-out notch on one end, like a finger pole. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't accidental. This was deliberate. This was hidden. I hooked my fingers into the notch and pulled. It didn't budge. It was wedged tight. I looked around the shed, my eyes landing on the screwdriver still lying on the workbench. I grabbed it. I knelt back down and wedged the tip of the screwdriver into the seam between the board and the dirt. I wiggled it, levering it back and forth. The dirt was packed hard around it. For a few minutes, nothing happened. My breath plumed in the cold air. My muscles strained. Then, with a soft sucking sound, one side of the board lifted a fraction of an inch. I worked the screwdriver around to the other side, prying and twisting. Slowly, painstakingly, I loosened the board from its earthy tomb. Finally, I was able to get my fingers underneath it and lift it out. It was a simple plank of plywood, but it felt as significant as a slab of granite. I set it aside and peered into the hole it had revealed. There, nestled in a shallow depression lined with a sheet of old plastic, was a metal box. It was an old Army surplus ammunition can, painted olive drab, with a heavy latch on the front. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the reason. The shed, the land, the key, it all led to this. A secret buried under the floor. My hands were shaking as I reached into the hole and lifted the box out. It was heavier than I expected, solid and dense. I placed it on the workbench, the metal cold against the scarred wood. It felt like an artifact from another world. The latch was stiff but not locked. I took a steadying breath, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I flipped it open. The lid opened with a clean, metallic clink. I stared down, my mind racing with possibilities. Gold? Jewels? A pile of cash that would solve all my problems? What was inside was far more complicated. On top lay a thick, cream-colored envelope. My name, Elara, was written on the front in a familiar, slightly messy script. Liam's handwriting. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I had to grip the edge of the workbench to steady myself. Liam. He had been here. This was from him. Beneath the envelope, I could see the edges of neatly stacked bills. Not a fortune, but a substantial amount. I carefully lifted the envelope out. It was unsealed. Underneath it was a thick stack of $100 bills, held together by a simple rubber band. I counted it quickly. $5,000. Enough to buy a used car, to rent a small apartment for a few months, to eat something other than canned soup. It was a lifeline, a powerful, immediate, tangible lifeline. But it wasn't the money that held my attention. It was the letter. My hands trembled as I unfolded the pages. There were 3 of them, filled with his familiar handwriting. My dearest Elara, it began. If you are reading this, then I am so sorry. It means that the worst has happened. Not just to me, but to us. It means I failed. And for that, I will never be able to forgive myself. I don't know the circumstances that led you here. I pray every day that you never have to find this place. This was my panic room, my break glass in case of emergency plan. I bought this land and this old shed a year ago, under a company name so no one could trace it back to us. I paid cash. The deed is clean. I'm hoping that if you're here, it's because my lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, was able to get the key to you as I instructed. I see now that even that plan might have failed. Maybe you got here some other way. It doesn't matter. You are here. You are safe. That's all that matters. I had to stop reading. A sob, raw and ragged, tore its way out of my chest. He had planned this. A year ago, while we were still happy, While I thought our biggest problem was what to have for dinner, he was secretly building a lifeboat for a shipwreck I didn't even know we were sailing towards. The secret loans, the debt, it wasn't carelessness, it was desperation. I wiped my eyes on the sleeve of my jacket and forced myself to keep reading. I know you have questions. I know you're probably angry with me. You have every right to be. I kept things from you, Alara. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to protect you. I got us into a mess, a terrible mess. It started with my father's business. After he died, I found out he'd been taken in by a bad investment scheme. A local developer, a man named Marcus Thorne, had sold him on a land deal that was basically a scam. My father lost everything, and he took out loans to cover it, loans against his own house. When he died, that debt passed to me. I was ashamed. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could invest my way out of it, trade my way out of it. I took out more loans, trying to fill a hole by digging it deeper. I was proud and I was stupid. And I was drowning. Marcus Thorne. The name was vaguely familiar. A local big shot whose face was sometimes on the news, cutting a ribbon for a new, soulless housing development. I sank down onto a dusty crate, the letter shaking in my hands. The foreclosure, the bills. It all started to click into place. A horrifying, sickening puzzle. It wasn't random. It wasn't just bad luck. It was this man. It got worse, the letter continued. I started digging into Thorne's business. I found out my father wasn't his only victim. He'd been doing this for years, targeting small landowners, elderly people, families in financial trouble. He'd use fraudulent appraisals, predatory loans, and a web of shell corporations to snap up their properties for pennies on the dollar. He ruined dozens of families in this county. I gathered proof, Ilara. I have documents, account numbers, testimonies from a former employee who was terrified to speak up. I was going to go to the authorities, but Thorne found out. He let me know, in no uncertain terms, that if I went public, he would destroy us. He would call in every debt I had. He would make sure we lost the house, the car, everything. He told me he would ruin my name, so I'd never work again. I was trapped. So I made a choice. I decided to protect you. I created this bolt hole. The $5,000 in this box is all I could scrape together. It's clean. Use it to start over. Disappear. Forget about all of this. Forget about me and the mess I made. That is all I ask. The letter ended there, but there was a postscript added in what looked like a shakier hand. P.S. There is more. The proof against Thorne. It's hidden here, in the shed. But finding it is a choice. If you take the money and walk away, no one will blame you. I wouldn't blame you. But if you choose to fight, if you choose to see this through, the truth is in the heart of this place. The workbench. It always holds everything together. I love you, Liam. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through my tears. Grief, anger, a profound, aching love. He hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't been careless. He had been fighting a war I never knew existed. And he had built me an ark. He had given me an escape route. But he had also given me a choice. A terrible, heavy choice. Take the $5,000 and run. Disappear. Start a new life. A quiet life, haunted by the ghost of this injustice. Or stay. Fight. Open a door that Liam himself had been too scared to walk through. A door that could lead to justice for dozens of families, but could also lead to danger, to the wrath of a powerful, ruthless man. I cried. I cried for Liam, for the weight he had carried alone. I cried for my own ignorance, for the happy, simple life I thought we'd had. I cried for the families this man Thorne had ruined. And I cried for myself, for the impossible choice I now faced. The shed, which minutes ago had felt like a tomb, now felt like a crucible. A place where my future would be forged. I could be a victim who ran, or I could be a survivor who fought. I looked at the money in the box, then at the solid, scarred old workbench. It holds everything together. What did that mean? The answer was there, waiting. But opening it meant I could never go back. It meant accepting Liam's war as my own. Have you ever been faced with a choice like that? A choice where the easy path is to walk away, but your soul is telling you to stay and fight, even if it scares you to death. If this is hitting you, if you've ever had to choose the harder right over the easier wrong, let me know in the comments. It's important to know we're not alone in those moments. This community is for people who understand that the most important battles are the ones we fight inside ourselves. The ones that define who we are. The rest of that day passed in a blur. I didn't touch the money. I didn't touch the workbench. I just sat on the dusty floor of the shed, rereading Liam's letter until the ink started to feel like it was tattooed onto my brain. The sun arced across the sky, its weak light crawling across the room. And as dusk fell, a deep, penetrating cold set in. I wasn't prepared for it. I had my jacket, but it was no match for the damp chill coming up from the earth. I wrapped myself in an old, musty tarp I found in the corner, the plastic crinkling with every movement. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Liam's face, not smiling like in the photo, but strained, worried. I heard his voice, not from the letter, but from my memory, humming off-key, telling a bad joke, whispering, "I love you," in the dark. He had carried this burden alone. The thought was a physical pain in my chest. He had walked around our home, shared our bed, kissed me goodnight, all while this monster, Thorn, was holding a financial gun to his head. The anger I felt was a clean, hot flame that finally started to burn away the fog of grief and self-pity. He hadn't lied to me to betray me. He had lied to protect me. He had built this place not as a tomb for our old life, but as a potential cradle for my new one. And he had left the choice, the final, most important choice, to me. He trusted me. He trusted me to be strong enough. By the time the first hint of dawn painted the cracked window with a sliver of gray light, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to run. Running was what I had been doing for months. Running from the bank, from the repossession, from the grief. Running was a dead end. Liam had tried to fight and been trapped. He had left me the map and the weapons. To walk away would be to spit on his memory, to invalidate the sacrifice he had made. It would mean letting Marcus Thorne win, and I would not let him win. I stood up, my body stiff and aching from the cold. I folded Liam's letter carefully and tucked it into my backpack. Then I turned to the workbench. "The heart of this place," he'd written. "It always holds everything together." I ran my hands over its surface. It was solid oak, thick and heavy. The top was a patchwork of scars, but the frame, the legs, the drawers, they were immaculately constructed. The joints were tight, the craftsmanship precise. This wasn't just a functional piece of furniture, it was a work of art. Liam had been a carpenter in his spare time, a hobbyist, he'd called it. He'd built the bookshelves in our old living room, the little table on our porch. I looked closer at the workbench. It didn't look like something he would have built. It was older, more rustic. Maybe he had found it, restored it. There were 3 drawers on the right-hand side. I pulled the top one open. It was filled with old sandpaper and wood files. The second held a collection of drill bits. The third was empty, save for a fine layer of sawdust. I ran my fingers along the inside, feeling for a false bottom, a hidden latch. Nothing. I stood back, frustrated. "It holds everything together." The phrase echoed in my mind. What holds a workbench together? The legs, the frame, the bolts. My eyes fell on the large, black iron vise bolted to the corner. It was a massive, heavy piece of equipment, and it was bolted through the top of the bench with 4 thick hexagonal bolts. But something was odd. 3 of the bolts were rusted, their edges softened with age. The 4th was different. It was cleaner, the edges sharper. It looked newer. My heart gave a little jump. I knelt and looked under the bench. The bolts went all the way through the thick oak top, secured underneath with large nuts. I reached up and touched the nut corresponding to the new-looking bolt. It felt different, looser. I tried to turn it with my fingers. It moved. It wasn't just loose, it was unscrewed almost all the way. It was a dummy. It wasn't holding anything together. It was hiding something. I unscrewed it the rest of the way. It came off in my hand. Then I went back to the top and carefully lifted the bolt head. It wasn't a bolt. It was a plug, a perfectly machined cylinder of steel, designed to look like a bolt. And underneath it was a hole, about an inch in diameter, drilled deep into the body of the workbench. My hands were shaking again, but this time with adrenaline, not fear. I peered into the hole. It was dark. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling with the flashlight app. I shone the light into the hole. Deep inside, I could see the glint of something metal, a cylinder. I reached in with 2 fingers, but I couldn't get a grip on it. I looked around the shed, my eyes scanning for something I could use. A pair of long-nosed pliers lay on one of the shelves. Perfect. I grabbed them, wiped the dust off on my jeans, and carefully inserted the tip into the hole. I managed to grip the edge of the metal cylinder. Slowly, carefully, I began to pull it out. It was a tight fit. After a few tense moments, it came free. It was a small, tightly sealed metal tube, about 6 inches long. A waterproof document holder. I unscrewed the cap. Inside, rolled into a tight scroll, was a thin sheaf of papers and a single, tiny object that fell into my palm. It was a USB flash drive. I unrolled the papers. The top sheet was another note from Liam. "Alara, if you found this, you chose to fight. I knew you would. You were always the strong one. What you're holding is everything." The drive contained scanned copies of all the documents, plus audio recordings of my conversations with Thorne's former employee. The papers are the originals of the most important documents: the fraudulent loan agreements, the falsified appraisals. The ledger in the back shows the money trail, how Thorne moved the money through his shell companies. It's enough. It's more than enough. Be careful. Thorne is not a man to be trifled with. Don't go to the local police. He has friends there. Go to the state. Or to the press. Find someone you can trust. This is your fight now. Finish it. For my father. For all the other families. For us. I love you forever. Liam. I sank to the floor, the papers and the USB drive clutched in my hand. This was it. The bomb he had built but had been too afraid to detonate. The truth. And he had just handed me the fuse. I sat there for a long time. The cold of the dirt floor forgotten. The weight of the world resting in my palm. I had the power to burn a man's empire to the ground. And I had no idea what to do next. The first person I thought of was Mr. Henderson. He was part of the system, yes, but he was a good man. His tie was always crooked and his eyes were kind. He was the only person in a position of authority who had treated me like a human being. He was my only anchor in this storm. The problem was, my phone was at 5% battery, and I was in a shed in the middle of nowhere. I looked at the $5,000 still sitting in the ammo can. Liam had said it was clean, meant for me to escape. But my plans had changed. I carefully took out $200. The rest I left in the box, which I placed back in its hiding spot under the floor. I put the board back in place and scattered some dirt over it. No one would ever know it was there. With the $200, the USB drive, and the original documents tucked safely in the inner pocket of my jacket, I walked back out the dirt track to the county road. The world looked different now. The gray sky didn't seem so oppressive. The skeletal trees didn't look like claws. They looked like arms reaching for the sky. My purpose had changed, and so had my perception. I waited for over an hour, the wind whipping my hair around my face. Finally, I saw the headlights of an approaching car. It was an old, beat-up pickup truck. I stepped out and stuck out my thumb. It was something the old Ilara would have never, ever done. But the old Ilara was gone. The truck slowed and pulled over. An old farmer with a face like a road map rolled down the window. "Need a lift?" he asked, his voice a friendly rumble. "To Oakhaven, if you're headed that way," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Climb in," he said, nodding toward the passenger door. The ride into town was quiet. The farmer, whose name was George, asked me no questions, and I was grateful. He dropped me off in front of a small diner in the center of Oakhaven. I thanked him, and he just tipped his hat and drove off. The town was small, a single main street with a handful of shops. I found a public payphone, a relic I was surprised still existed, and used my calling card to call the county services office. I asked for Mr. Henderson. "I'm sorry, he's with a client," the receptionist said in a bored tone. "Can I take a message?" "It's an emergency," I said, my voice rising with urgency. "Please, just tell him Ilara Vance called. Tell him I'm in Oakhaven. I need his help. It's about the Miller property." There was a pause. I could hear her sigh. "Fine, I'll give him the message." The line went dead. I had no idea if he would get the message, or if he would even care. All I could do was wait. I went into the diner, bought a cup of coffee with my new money, and sat in a booth by the window, my hand resting on the lump in my jacket. An hour passed, then two. I was starting to lose hope when a familiar, unassuming sedan pulled up outside. Mr. Henderson got out. He looked worried. He saw me through the window, and his expression shifted to one of profound relief. He came inside and slid into the booth opposite me. "Ilara," he said, his voice low. "What's going on? The office said it was an emergency. Are you okay? Is the shed? Did something happen?" I just looked at him, my exhaustion catching up with me. I didn't have the energy for a long explanation. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the small bundle of papers, and laid them on the table between our coffee cups. "My husband left me something," I said quietly. "He left me proof that a man named Marcus Thorne is a crook who has been stealing land from people in this county for years. And I think he's the reason I ended up homeless." Mr. Henderson stared at the papers, then at me. He didn't look shocked or disbelieving. He just looked sad. He picked up the top sheet, a loan document with a forged signature, and his face hardened. "Marcus Thorne," he said, the name tasting like poison. "I've heard stories, rumors. We've had families come through the system, people who lost everything overnight, farms that had been in their families for generations. It never made sense. They were always tight-lipped, scared." He looked me straight in the eye. "You know how dangerous this is, right?" I nodded. "Liam knew. He told me to be careful. This is bigger than just careful, Ilara. Thorne practically owns this county." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "But this is hard evidence." He tapped the USB drive. "What's on this?" "Everything," I said. "Scans, audio recordings, the whole story." He was silent for a long time, just staring at the small pile of evidence on the table. The weight of it seemed to press down on the whole diner. He was a social worker, a helper. This was far beyond his pay grade. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the desire to help, warring with the instinct for self-preservation. Finally, he took a deep breath and seemed to come to a decision. "Okay," he said, his voice firm. "You can't go to the local authorities. You're right about that. But I know someone, a lawyer I went to school with. She works for a non-profit that specializes in corporate fraud and public interest cases. Her name is Jessica Romano. She's based in the city, and she's fearless, and she hates bullies like Thorne." He pulled out his phone. "Let me make a call. Don't move." He walked outside to the sidewalk, pacing as he talked. I watched him through the glass, a small, unassuming man in a crooked tie, making a phone call that could change everything. He was choosing to step into the fight with me. I wasn't alone anymore. He came back in a few minutes later, a new energy about him. She wants to meet. Tonight. She's driving out. She said to meet her at her satellite office, an hour from here. She's taking this seriously. He looked at me, a glimmer of something fierce in his kind eyes. Are you ready for this? I thought of Liam's letter. I thought of the cold dirt floor of the shed. I thought of the invisible, broken families Thorne had left in his wake. Yes, I said. And for the first time, I believed it. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Jessica Romano was everything Mr. Henderson had promised. Sharp, relentless, and utterly unimpressed by Marcus Thorne's reputation. We met in a sterile, anonymous office building halfway between Oakhaven and the city. I told her everything, showing her the letters, the documents, the drive. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she just nodded slowly. Your husband was a brave man, she said. And he was a smart one. This is a fortress. The legal machine began to turn, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Jessica took the evidence not to the local DA, but straight to the state attorney general's office. An investigation was launched, quietly and discreetly. Subpoenas were issued, bank records were frozen. Thorne's web of shell corporations began to unravel under the harsh light of legal scrutiny. I was terrified. I stayed in the shed, using the money Liam had left to buy groceries, a small propane heater, and a sleeping bag that was rated for winter temperatures. Every time a car drove down the county road, my heart would leap into my throat. I was convinced Thorne would send someone for me. But Jessica had assured me I was protected. The investigation was sealed, and my name was kept out of it. I was a confidential informant, a ghost. During that time, the shed became my sanctuary. I worked on it every day. I scrubbed the floors, patched the cracked window with a piece of plastic and tape, and organized the old tools on the walls. I used some of the money to buy a few cans of paint and painted the interior a bright, clean white. The space transformed. It was no longer a dusty, forgotten relic. It was a clean, bright, functional space. It was my space. I found a strange peace in the simple physical labor. My hands, once accustomed to a keyboard and mouse, grew callous from pulling weeds and hammering nails. I cleared the quarter-acre of land, cutting down the thorns and briars, uncovering the rich soil underneath. I found the remnants of an old vegetable garden and decided to turn the soil, preparing it for the spring. I was quite literally putting down roots. Mr. Henderson would visit once a week, bringing news from Jessica and a bag of groceries. He'd sit on the crate while I worked, and we'd talk. He told me about some of the other families, the ones he now suspected were Thorne's victims. An elderly couple who had lost their farm, a young family who had been foreclosed on after a suspicious fire. My fight was becoming their fight. The news finally broke in the local paper, a small article at first, then a front-page exposé. Local developer Marcus Thorne under state investigation for fraud. The town of Oakhaven started buzzing. People I'd only seen in passing, George, the farmer who'd given me a ride, the woman who ran the hardware store, the waitress at the diner, started to look at me differently. They didn't know the details, but rumors had begun to swirl that the investigation had started with an anonymous tip related to the old Miller property. One day, George pulled up in his truck while I was clearing the garden. He got out and handed me a box of vegetable seedlings. Figured you could use a head start for spring, he said, avoiding my eyes. We appreciate what you're doing. That man, he hurt a lot of good people. I realized then that I wasn't an outsider anymore. I was part of the community, connected by a shared wound and a shared hope for justice. The legal battle stretched on for almost a year. Thorne fought, of course, with a team of expensive lawyers, but the evidence Liam had gathered was irrefutable. One by one, his defenses crumbled. His former employee, protected by an immunity deal, testified against him. Other victims, emboldened by the investigation, came forward with their own stories. In the end, Marcus Thorne was indicted on multiple counts of fraud, racketeering, and money laundering. He took a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence, but he was ruined. His assets were seized to create a restitution fund for his victims. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The fund would only pay back a fraction of what people had lost. Some families would never recover. But it was justice. It was accountability. My portion of the restitution, as the inheritor of my father-in-law's claim, was not a lottery win. It was a modest sum, about $50,000, but to me, it felt like a fortune. It was enough. It was more than enough. I stood on my small patch of land, the land Liam had bought for me, and I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to leave. This was home now. I used the money to hire a local contractor to build a small house, a tiny house really, right next to the shed. It was just one room, with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a large window that looked out over the garden I had planted. The shed remained my workshop, my studio. I started taking on small freelance graphic design projects again, working from a desk I built myself, on the very spot where the workbench used to be. I had moved the workbench into the corner, a monument to where my new life had begun. I often think about the word rich. When I first got that shed, if you had asked me what would make me rich, I would have said money. $1 million. Enough to erase the debt, to buy a nice house, to never worry again. But I was wrong. What I found under that workbench did make me rich, but not in the way I expected. It gave me the truth, which is more valuable than gold. It gave me a purpose, which is more sustaining than any bank account. It gave me back my own strength, my own agency. It gave me a community. And it gave me a home, not a building, but a place on this earth where I belonged, a place I had fought for. The shed taught me that home isn't about 4 walls and a roof. It's about safety. It's about purpose. It's about having a place to stand your ground. And inheritance isn't just about what is left to you. It's about what you choose to do with it. Liam didn't leave me money. He left me a responsibility. He left me a chance to finish his fight, to find justice not just for us, but for people I had never met. He left me the gift of becoming the person I was always meant to be. The scars are still there. The grief for Liam is a part of me, a quiet ache that will likely never fully disappear. But it's no longer a crushing weight. It's a memory that fuels me, a reminder of the profound, complicated, and protective love that set me on this path. I am rich in ways that cannot be counted. I have the quiet satisfaction of a garden that I planted myself. I have the respect of a community that I helped to heal. And I have the unshakable knowledge that even when you lose everything, you can still build a life from the ground up, starting with nothing more than a $5 shed and a reason to fight. So, I want to ask you, what does home mean to you? Is it a place? A person? A feeling? Maybe your inheritance wasn't money or property, but a story you need to tell, or a battle you need to fight. The most valuable things are rarely the ones with a price tag. If this story meant something to you, if it stirred something in you, I hope you'll subscribe and join this community we're building. Share your own story in the comments below. I read every one of them because I believe our stories are the most valuable things we own. They are the proof that we lived, that we loved, and that we fought for something that mattered. Thank you for listening. And remember, no matter how small or broken your shelter may seem, it might just be the place where you find the strength to build a castle.